My younger sister Rachel looked radiant in her wedding gown, a pure white dress edged with delicate lace and adorned with glistening pearls, embodying the hopeful innocence of a 23-year-old girl who had yet to feel the cracks life could leave behind. I was seated at table number 9, the table reserved for those the organizers didn't quite know where to place. It sat next to the kitchen door, where servers bustled past in a steady stream, balancing trays of champagne flutes I knew better than to dream of touching. The grand ballroom in the heart of Seattle truly was a perfect place for a wedding. The ceilings soared high above us, crowned with crystal chandeliers that shimmered like strands of stars. Polished marble floors reflected the fading sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows, bouncing light onto the sequined gowns and tuxedos that sparkled in its glow. Everything in that room whispered of fresh beginnings and a world reserved for the well-appointed. Somewhere nearby, I heard someone being asked to verify their security badge. The air tightened for a beat, but I paid it no mind. 3 hours earlier, I had left my daughter Chloe with Camila. The look of disappointment on her face when I stepped out the door still clung to me. Chloe was only 6 years old. She didn't understand why her mother had to go to a party she wasn't invited to, just as she didn't understand why her father had disappeared before she ever learned to spell the word dad. I placed my napkin gently across my lap and tried to stay composed, as relatives let their gazes skim over me like I was a wrinkle in the silk dress of their otherwise perfect evening. My mother nodded a cursory hello, then turned back to laugh with a blonde woman seated beside her. My younger brother, the groom, walked past my table without stopping. I didn't blame him. My presence today was little more than an unwelcome blemish on the picture-perfect canvas my family had been painting for years. I knew what they were thinking. Emily Carter, 25 years old, once a final-year medical student, now a struggling pediatric nurse living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment out in the suburbs, raising a daughter alone. No husband, no reputation, no one standing beside her at moments like this. They never said it aloud, but I felt it in the way they avoided my eyes, in the forced politeness of their smiles, in the way they sat me by the kitchen door rather than with the family in the center tables. A violin began to play. The bride and groom stepped onto the dance floor. Applause rippled through the room. I tried to smile. A familiar love song filled the air. Couples took each other's hands and left their tables. Moving toward the music, I stayed in my seat. No one asked me to dance. No one turned to see if I wanted to step outside for some fresh air. I sipped my water, silently willing the evening to pass more quickly. And then, a warm voice spoke behind me, cutting cleanly through the quiet ache of my thoughts. "Would you care to dance with me?" I turned around. Standing there was a tall man in a black suit, his eyes bright, his mouth curved just slightly, as if he already knew the answer. I had never seen him before, and I didn't yet know that a single nod in that moment would take my life down a path I never could have imagined. If you're still here, listening with your heart, and you feel it stir at the quiet, honest moments in lives like Emily's, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching this from? Leave a comment below and share the city or country you call home, so we can see just how far this story has traveled across the map. And if this story has touched you in some way, if you believe it deserves to be heard, don't forget to subscribe to the Dear Single Mom YouTube channel. Give this video a like, and share it with the women you care about. Because sometimes, all it takes is one simple story to help someone feel a little less alone. Now, we invite you to stay with us for the next part of this journey. It may seem like chance, but it just might be the beginning of something extraordinary. I don't remember exactly when I nodded, only that his hand was already reaching toward me, steady and unhurried, as if inviting a quiet woman sitting alone near the kitchen to dance was the most natural thing in the world. He introduced himself as Nate Moretti. The name gave me pause. It rang familiar, in that cautious way, like something you might have heard on a late-night news segment or whispered between sips of morning coffee. But when I placed my hand in his and stepped onto the dance floor, I wasn't thinking about that. I saw only those amber eyes, lit with something different from every other man in the room. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was something else entirely. A knowing look, like he could read what I hadn't said aloud. The music softened. A classic jazz tune began, and the saxophone drew out a note that felt like the long breath of someone who had grown too used to being alone. Nate placed his hand gently on my waist and guided me to the rhythm with quiet precision. He was a full head taller than me, and every movement carried confidence and control, but never force. "Have you ever danced like this before?" he asked, his voice smooth and warm like stone warmed by sun. I laughed, surprised at the sound of it. "Not really," I said. "Back in college. I once took a dance class just to avoid signing up for a gym course." He nodded and smiled. I wasn't sure if the smile was real or part of the mask a man like him might wear, but real or not, I let myself believe in it for that moment. As we moved past the crowd, I could feel eyes turning toward us. The Carter family's wayward daughter, now dancing with a man who clearly didn't belong to the shrinking middle-class world I came from. I saw my mother staring, then leaning in to whisper something to my aunt. Tyler, my ex-husband, was at the wedding too. He sat 3 tables away beside his new wife, who also happened to be my cousin. He saw me. I knew it. His gaze slid past me like I was a memory he was trying to erase but couldn't quite manage. I turned away, refusing to let old ghosts rise again. Nate leaned in and whispered that he had just saved me from a close call. I laughed again, this time louder. He asked if I wanted to keep dancing. I nodded. Somehow, in the middle of that crowded 20 ballroom, I felt safer in the arms of this stranger than I had in a long time. A new song began. We kept dancing. He told me a little about himself, that he owned a chain of Italian restaurants along the West Coast and had just opened a new location in Seattle. I didn't ask what he was doing at my sister's wedding, because truthfully, I didn't want to break the spell of whatever warmth had settled quietly between us. He didn't ask about my job, or my daughter, or why I was sitting alone at table number 9. And maybe it was that his silence, his refusal to pry, that let me breathe more easily than I had in years. When the final song ended, we stood there for a while, still and unhurried, both of us sensing that something had just happened, though neither said a word. He bowed his head like a gentleman. "Thank you for the dance," he said. I smiled and turned to walk back to my seat, but then he reached for my hand again. "Could you do something for me?" he asked. I was caught off guard, but before I could answer, he spoke again, so quietly that only I could hear. "Just for tonight, pretend to be my girlfriend." One time, I raised an eyebrow. "Out of everyone here, why me?" He looked at me, his face serious. "Because if you don't, people will think I came here to stir up trouble, and because I need someone who looks trustworthy." I let out a soft laugh, part puzzled, part intrigued. I didn't know anything about this man, but what I did know, without a doubt, was that from the moment I took his hand, I no longer felt alone. I looked at Nate, trying to figure out if this was some strange joke, but his face remained serious. And if anything, his eyes carried even more urgency than when he'd first asked me to dance. Pretend to be his girlfriend. Just for tonight. Nothing more. I hadn't even had time to react before he stepped closer, leaned down just enough for his voice to land softly in my ear. "If you don't help me, people will think I'm here to threaten someone. And in Seattle, rumors move faster than light." I glanced around. Sure enough, a few sets of eyes were directed toward us, including a group of men in dark suits standing near the far wall. They weren't from my side of the family. One of them had a tattoo snaking up his wrist. A small detail, but enough to make my heart beat just a little faster. Nate spoke again, his voice low and smooth, like velvet. "All you have to do is stand beside me. Smile just enough. And if anyone asks, say we met in Portland." I hesitated. This wasn't right. I was a pediatric nurse, not an actress. I didn't know how to lie smoothly in a room full of sharp-eyed people. But just as I was about to say no, his eyes met mine. There was no pressure in them, only something like a quiet plea, mixed with a weariness he could no longer hide. I let out a breath. What would happen if I said no? Maybe nothing. Or maybe things would unravel fast and loud. And more than that, I was standing in a party I didn't belong to, in a room where only minutes earlier I felt like a smear of ink on a white tablecloth. I nodded, so slightly I wasn't sure if I meant it or not. But Nate smiled as if he'd been waiting for that answer all along. He slipped his arm around mine, guiding me off the dance floor. Through rows of crowded tables and curious glances, I heard whispers behind us. Someone asked my mother who the man was, and my mother responded with a silence so deliberate it was almost telling, standing beside Nate, shoulder to shoulder. I felt the air shift. Everything around us seemed to change. The stairs from the far corner lost their edge. Even Tyler, my ex-husband, froze when he saw me with Nate. I don't think I'd ever seen that tired old gaze look quite so surprised. Nate didn't step away from me for even a moment. He introduced me as his new girlfriend, a woman he met while scouting locations for a restaurant in Portland. I tried to smile. My face felt hot with nerves, but under the warm golden lights, maybe no one could tell. One of the men nearby asked what I did for a living. I told the truth. I'm a pediatric nurse. He nodded, seeming disinterested, then turned back to Nate. They exchanged a few quick words in Italian, too fast for me to catch, but Nate's expression didn't change. When they moved on, I finally exhaled. Nate turned to me, gently asking if I was okay. I nodded, though inside I was a mess of unanswered questions. Who was he really? Why did he need me? And what exactly was unfolding in this room full of polite smiles and careful masks? But I didn't ask. I just stood there, trying not to let my hands shake, trying not to let the uncertainty show. Chloe was probably asleep by now, or maybe coloring in her favorite sketchbook. I wished I could call her, hear her small voice remind me that real life still existed outside this polished and unfamiliar world. But Nate was still beside me, and in that fleeting moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was starting to feel safe standing next to someone I knew absolutely nothing about. I had never imagined that a simple linked arm and a few quiet introductions could shift the air around me so completely. Nate and I walked through the reception hall, where the lights still glimmered like a dream and the music floated gently, a thin veil over something electric waiting to rise beneath the surface. Every gaze turned toward us now, no longer indifferent or pitying as before, but curious, assessing, touched with disbelief. My mother was the first to approach. She moved with polite poise, yet her eyes pinned me with the sharp chill of needles. "You are not going to introduce your friend to me?" she asked, her tone soft, as though speaking about the weather, but every word crisp and deliberate. I smiled, steady as I could manage. "This is Nate, my boyfriend. We have known each other for a few months, but tonight is the first time I have brought him to meet everyone." Nate offered her a greeting that looked carved perfectly for the moment. "A pleasure to meet you." My mother nodded, but suspicion lingered in her expression. Ever since Chloe was born, she had treated me like a silent bruise on the family portrait. Standing here with a stranger who looked as though he belonged to another world entirely must have jolted the careful, outdated system by which she measured worth and shame. Then came my younger brother, the groom, and his new wife. They smiled, shook Nate's hand, and asked the pleasant, empty questions people do. "Where did you two meet? What are your plans?" Nate answered smoothly, without hesitation, as though he truly had known me for months, as though we had spent long evenings together, sipping wine and speaking softly about futures we shared. And for a fleeting second, even I felt caught in the web of our invented story. The eyes around me began to change, no longer the pity reserved for the woman they assumed would always drift alone with her daughter, but a sharper curiosity, as if trying to redraw where I belonged within the family map that had been drawn long before. Tyler stood not far away. He had an arm around his wife, laughing with someone. Yet every now and then I caught his eyes flicker toward us. That familiar gaze, once cool and arrogant, looked unsettled now. Perhaps he never expected me to move on, let alone with a man like Nate. My cousin, his new wife, cast me a single look, something sharp and shimmering, before turning away. A brief flicker of displeasure crossed her face. She had always been the one people watched, the one lifted up by every admiring glance. But tonight, for a moment, I was the one in their line of sight. I did not know whether I should feel vindicated or simply tired. Nate guided me gently away from the circle of questions by suggesting we get some food. At the buffet table, where the noise softened and the room felt wider, I looked at him and breathed out, You are good at this. Nate raised a brow. At what? I gestured faintly. At making people believe this is real. He smiled. And the smile was not entirely light. Sometimes, people only need a little faith to convince themselves. I did not know whether he spoke about me, about himself, or about both of us, but I knew I had stepped into a game whose rules I did not yet understand. And strangely, I felt no desire to walk away. For the first time in years, I did not feel like an extra in my own story. Maybe it was the weight of Nate's hand at my side, or the way he had held me in front of my family, as though I was something worth choosing, worth keeping, even if only for a role we were pretending to play. After leaving the buffet table, Nate and I found a quiet corner near the side hallway, where scented candles lined the corridor and released a gentle hint of vanilla that softened the air after so many tense conversations. I had not yet asked him about what had happened earlier when my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Camila. I startled slightly. It was almost 10 at night, and I had told her I would pick Chloe up after the wedding. Camila never called unless something mattered. I excused myself from Nate and answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Hello? On the other end. Camila spoke softly but clearly, and there was that familiar edge of concern. You okay? I saw a picture of you on Facebook. Someone posted a photo of you dancing with a man. You know I am not one to pry. But who is he? I have never heard you mention him. I sat down on a nearby chair, gripping the phone a little too tightly. I am fine. Camila. He is just a friend. He happened to be here and we came together. Camila was silent for a few seconds. Emily. I know you. When you sound that calm, it means you are hiding something. I closed my eyes and exhaled. I will explain later. I need to stay a little longer. How is Chloe? Is she all right? She is awake, Camila said. She is waiting for you. I told her your car broke down so you would be late. But she is sad. She keeps asking why her mother did not invite her. Hearing that, my chest tightened. I was familiar with guilt. Being a single mother meant every day choosing between duty, survival, and the soft heart of a child. But each time Chloe was hurt because I was gone, it still felt like something tearing inside me. I will come get her in 30 minutes. I whispered. Thank you. Camila answered with a simple warmth. Just do not forget I am always here. Emily. Always. When I hung up and looked up again, Nate was standing at the end of the corridor. One hand in his pocket, his gaze steady and quiet on me. He did not ask a thing, just came closer and sat beside me. Everything all right? I nodded, though of course it was not entirely true. I need to pick up my daughter. She stayed awake waiting for me. Nate tilted his head slightly. Thoughtful. You are a single mother. I was not surprised he knew. He might have guessed from the call, or from the way my voice shifted at my daughter's name. I nodded. Chloe is 6. She is the only beautiful thing left after everything that fell apart. He was silent for a long moment, then spoke gently. May I come with you? I turned to him, startled. Come for what? You do not have to carry everything alone. Sometimes it is all right to let someone stand beside you, even if it is only for a moment. I did not know why those words tightened my throat. Maybe because they echoed a wish I once clung to on quiet nights when Chloe cried, when work weighed heavy, when I lay awake wondering how I would pay the next bill. I did not answer. I only nodded. When we arrived at Camila's home, Chloe was curled on the sofa with her worn stuffed bear. The moment she saw me, she ran into my arms, her small voice full of soft hurt. You were gone so long. I thought you forgot me. I knelt and held her close, whispering apologies. Nate stayed behind me, silent. Yet his presence felt warm in the small room. Chloe looked up and saw him, her eyes wide with curiosity. Who is that? Mommy. I smiled and brushed her hair. That is a friend of mine. His name is Nate. Say hello. Chloe gave a shy nod and whispered hello. Nate bent down, offering a gentle smile I had not yet seen from him. Hello. Chloe. It is very nice to meet you. And in that quiet moment, in a modest apartment with soft light glowing around us, something brushed against me, delicate and unexpected. like a glimpse of a future I had never dared to imagine. 3 days after the wedding, life seemed to settle back into its familiar rhythm. I still reported for my hospital shifts, still woke early to make breakfast for Chloe, still tucked her into bed each night with her favorite children's book. Nate had sent a few messages, short notes thanking me for helping that evening go smoothly, asking how Chloe was, checking if I was all right. I replied briefly, keeping a polite distance. He seemed to understand, never pushing. I believed it would all end quietly, that our strange performance had closed exactly where it should, each of us returning to our separate lives. But on the 4th evening, just after Chloe and I finished dinner, there was a sudden, urgent knock at the door. I was not expecting anyone at that hour. Camila always messaged before arriving, and the neighbors had never once knocked on my door. I told Chloe to stay in the living room and stepped toward the entrance. 2 unfamiliar men stood outside. Both wore black jackets, their expressions rigid, their eyes cold. One was tall with a faint scar on his left cheek, the other with cropped hair and hands buried in his pockets as if hiding something. I asked who they were. The scarred man smiled, yet it was the kind of smile that chilled rather than warmed. "You are Emily Carter. We only want a quick word." I stepped back, leaving the door barely open. He continued softly, as though offering advice, not a threat, just a reminder that there are certain connections a person is better off avoiding. He spoke Nate's name without hesitation, without explanation, like a stone dropped into still water. I did not answer. I simply closed the door, but I saw it in his eyes before the lock clicked into place. Warning. Danger. I locked the door twice, pulled the curtains shut, turned on every light. Chloe sat on the living room rug, unaware. I pretended nothing had happened, played with her, told her a story, waited until she fell asleep. Then I went to the kitchen where my hands shook so hard I dropped a glass. I did not know what to do. Call the police. Call Camila. Yet the first thing I did was dial Nate. He answered in less than 3 rings. I skipped any greeting. 2 men came to my house. They know your name. They know mine. I heard movement on his end. A door opening. And when he spoke again, his voice was sharp as cut steel. "Are you and Chloe safe?" I said yes. Though my voice trembled, he spoke only one sentence. "Pack a bag and get Chloe ready. I am coming." About 15 minutes later, his car stopped outside. He did not wait for permission to enter. He checked the rooms, the windows, every corner. Chloe was asleep and I tried to stay composed. But when Nate returned to the living room, his expression had darkened. "You should not stay here another moment. It is not safe." I tried reason. "This is my home. I have work. Chloe has school." He shook his head. "Tomorrow you will have a car to take you both. Everything else can be handled later. Right now, I need you safe." We left that night and moved into Nate's penthouse, a soaring home at the top of a building overlooking the bay, as if we had stepped into the pages of a glossy magazine. Floor to ceiling, glass windows opened toward the glittering city lights. Walnut floors glowed under soft illumination, and the kitchen stretched out in sleek marble and quiet luxury. Chloe wandered the space in awe, delighted by her own room, complete with bookshelves, a drawing corner, and a wide window overlooking the street below. I stood in the open kitchen, feeling strangely out of place. This was not my world. I did not belong to polished floors and guarded elevators and a view that made the city look like a painting. But Nate did. He belonged to the glow, to these walls that felt unshakable, protected by layers I could not name. After I tucked Chloe into her new bed, I returned to the living room. Nate stood by the glass, watching the distant lights as if weighing every shadow beneath them. I joined him without speaking. After a long silence, he said quietly, "I am sorry I pulled you into this." I did not know how to answer, but when he turned to me, something in his eyes held me still. It was not a promise and not an explanation. It was simply recognition, sober and unguarded, enough to tell me the road ahead would not be simple. Danger had only brushed the edges of our lives, and I could feel more waiting just beyond the horizon. Yet I was here now, and for the first time in my life, I did not want to turn back. The first morning I woke in Nate's apartment, It felt as though I were still caught in a dream. Soft sunlight slipped through white curtains and washed across the wood floor, filling the wide, quiet room with a calm that felt foreign to everything I had known. Chloe was still asleep in the room beside mine, curled small against her worn stuffed bear, tucked into that impossibly soft bed like a kitten nestled in a cloud she had never even dared to imagine. I stepped out, hair tangled, eyes still heavy, and found Nate already in the kitchen. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves pushed back, carefully making coffee with the focus of someone performing a quiet ritual. I stood a moment simply watching, feeling like someone who had wandered into a part of life where she did not quite belong. He looked up, caught my gaze, and offered a gentle greeting. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" I nodded and sat at the counter as the scent of toasted bread and eggs drifted through the air, reminding me suddenly how hungry I was. Nate handed me a warm cup, his fingers brushing mine for the briefest second, enough for my heart to startle in my chest. "You do not have to do anything this morning," he said softly. "I arranged for someone to take Chloe to school, and I sent your supervisor a note so you could have the day." I looked up, startled. "How did you manage that?" He only lifted a shoulder, as though shifting the weight of the world was nothing at all. I asked nothing more, only felt a quiet wave of gratitude rise in me. Chloe woke soon after, hair wild, pajamas crooked, rubbing her eyes. When she saw Nate, she paused, but when he crouched slightly and asked if she was ready for breakfast, she nodded shyly. Something shifted after that, not loud and not sudden, but steady as sunlight warming a cold room. Breakfasts together each morning, Nate opening the car door for Chloe as though escorting a tiny queen, her giggles echoing through the hallway. The first time I had heard her laugh like that near a grown man since Tyler left. Evenings when Nate arrived early and brought cookies or a new children's book, answering every question Chloe tossed his way, even when she asked whether pandas could learn martial arts. Saturday afternoon I found them sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, coloring pages scattered around them, Nate holding a crayon as Chloe instructed him solemnly not to color outside the lines. And he listened as though her tiny voice carried the weight of something holy. I stood in the doorway and watched, my heart aching in a way that felt both tender and painful. It had been so long since my daughter trusted someone like that, so long since laughter filled the place where we lived. One night, after Chloe had fallen asleep, Nate and I sat on the balcony. A breeze brushed by, and the city glimmered below like a sky turned upside down. I held a cup of warm tea and asked quietly whether he had ever imagined having children. He smiled faintly and turned to me. "For the longest time, I never thought I would be fit for that. I grew up in a home that did not understand softness. But lately," he paused, and I heard the truth settling between us. "Lately, I think I am learning something new." I did not answer. We simply sat there together. No need for hurry. Nothing to prove. And in the gentle hush of that night, with the lights flickering like distant promises and the air holding just enough stillness to steady the heart, I realized something. Without vows or certainty, without rushing or reaching, I had already begun to grow used to him, not as a guest passing through my days, but as someone quietly staying. I did not know the exact moment when I began wanting to understand Nate more deeply. Perhaps it was the evening I watched him listen patiently as Chloe described a dream about an imaginary dog. Perhaps it was those late nights when we stood in the kitchen sharing instant noodles because both of us had forgotten to eat dinner. Yet the closer I lived to him, the more I felt there was something in him that did not quite match the calm, polished surface he showed the world. One quiet weekend afternoon, while Chloe was out with Camila, I asked Nate about his family. It seemed an innocent question, yet he paused before answering. "My family was not like a normal family," he said. "He grew up in a home where, from the time he was 6 years old, he learned to stay silent when adults argued. His father was Italian, his mother a Latina from America. They never married, yet lived together in a rooftop apartment in Brooklyn. His father was a chef, but also a man who ran an underground betting ring. The kitchen in his childhood home could smell of warm pizza every evening, yet it could also be the place where men in leather jackets counted stacks of money in the middle of the night." Nate told these things in a steady voice, as though the pain had aged into something like scars. At 15, he worked for his father, delivering packages, checking books, collecting debts. One night he saw a man beaten so badly he could not recognize his face. That was the first night Nate vomited blood from fear. But he did not quit. Because survival was the only thing he knew. I sat stunned. In my mind, people with pasts like his rarely broke free. They were pulled into a world that did not let go easily. I asked him what made him leave. Nate looked at me for a long moment before answering in a voice low as dusk. His mother had been killed in a retaliation attack. She had not been involved. Only present at the wrong time. In the wrong place. He was 21. She was the only person who ever held him when he cried. After she died, he walked away and never returned. He came to the West Coast with nothing but his hands and a recipe for tomato sauce his mother had taught him. He opened his first restaurant in San Francisco, then Los Angeles, then Seattle. But the old world did not release its hold. Men who remembered who he once was came back, not for business, but to remind him that a past like his could not be abandoned easily. I swallowed hard. Those men who came to my home, I whispered, they were because of you. Nate nodded. He did not hide it. They wanted to use you to send a message, to warn him that he could not walk away without consequence. I rose and stepped toward the glass. Staring at the city lighting up against night, everything felt suddenly fragile. I thought of Chloe, of the safety I had fought for through 6 long years, of the way her eyes brightened when she saw Nate, and of how his old world could reach toward us at any moment. You do not deserve to carry my trouble, Nate said behind me. If you want to leave, I will understand. I turned to him and asked the only question that mattered. Are you going back? Will you return to that world? He shook his head. No. Even if he had to fight with all he had, he would not be dragged down again. I believed him, though fear pressed inside my chest. I knew pasts do not die. They only sleep, waiting for the right moment to rise again. But in that moment, I also knew I was no longer standing outside his life. I had already stepped inside, and though I was afraid, I did not want to return to the lonely nights where I faced darkness alone. Nate was not perfect, but he was real. And to me, that meant everything. That morning, a light rain fell over Seattle, droplets tracing long paths down the window and turning the city outside into a blurred watercolor of motion and noise. I was packing Chloe's school bag when Nate received a call. He stood out on the balcony, voice lowered, footsteps restless in a way I had never seen before. I could not make out the words. But when he came back inside, something in his eyes had shifted. There was a chill there, urgent and grave. I asked what had happened. He did not answer right away. Instead, he stepped toward me, placed his hand on my shoulder, and looked straight into my eyes. Let me take Chloe to school today. You stay here. Do not go out. All right. I almost questioned him, but one look at his face told me this was not the time. I nodded, told Chloe to listen, reminded Nate to make sure she wore her raincoat. When the door closed behind them, a strange emptiness fell over the apartment, a quiet hollow I could not name. I made coffee but could not drink it. I wandered from room to room, the stillness of that beautiful space beginning to feel like a cage. Near midday, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I answered, and the voice on the other end drained the warmth from my blood. A man's voice. Rough, dragging each word as though savoring my panic. Emily Carter. Yes. What a shame. Your daughter almost got into the wrong car this morning. Lucky for her, the original driver showed up. I froze. Sound vanished. My pulse thundered in my ears. He said nothing else. Only a soft chuckle before the line went dead. My fingers shook as I called Nate, nearly dropping the phone. He answered immediately. My voice cracked as I asked what had happened. Someone tried to take Chloe. Nate was silent for a moment. I am coming back, he said. I will explain. Do not leave the apartment. I set the phone down and felt my body fold in on itself. Terror is not loud. It is a whisper that coils around your heart until breathing feels like a struggle. Minutes later, the door opened. Nate came in soaked from the rain, and hair tousled, anger burning raw in his eyes. He told me when he reached the school that a different car had been waiting. Same color as the official transport but without the logo. A man in a false uniform had been leading Chloe toward it. Nate did not talk. He simply pulled her away, and the man fled. I sank into the chair, holding my head in my hands. I could not believe how close it had come. My little girl, my innocent child, nearly taken by someone who did not care what it would cost her or me. Nate knelt in front of me, his hands firm on my knees, his eyes holding mine. I am sorry, Emily. I tried to keep you and Chloe separate from all of this, but I cannot control everything. It is time to end this. I saw the war behind his expression. The pain of a man who had already lost someone he loved and now had come within one breath of losing the only two souls who made him feel human again. I nodded silently, because there were no words left that mattered. All I knew was that I could not allow my daughter to face danger again, and I understood something else. To protect her, I needed to know exactly who we were up against. I never imagined there would come a day when I would willingly step into a place like this. An old warehouse buried deep inside the industrial district on the southern edge of the city. So silent I could hear the wind scrape through rusted metal seams. The air reeked of iron and mildew, sharp and cold enough to reach the marrow. I wore Nate's long coat, my hand clenched around the pocket until my fingers ached pale, each step steady, though inside me something heavy pressed like stone. Nate did not know I was here. I had left him a brief message with no explanation. Only one line. I need to end this. I knew I was no hero. Not someone who could shield anyone with strength or money. But I am a mother. And when someone threatens your child, fear finds no room to live. The man I came for was named Volkov. He was the name Nate never spoke, only hinted at like a shadow in his past. The one who watched and pulled strings from behind the curtain. Volkov was not only a smuggler, he was the embodiment of the world Nate had left behind but never truly escaped. When I stepped into the center of the empty warehouse, Volkov was already there, seated on a weathered wooden chair, his back against the wall, a cigarette unlit between his fingers. He was not as old as I expected, perhaps just past 40, tall and solid, with gray eyes as cold as ash. He watched me with a trace of amusement. "I did not expect you," he said in English tinged with Eastern Europe, steady as a slow rain. I swallowed and steadied my voice. "You tried to take my daughter. This is your final warning. Stay away from me and Nate." Volkov let out a low laugh without warmth. "You believe you are standing in some family drama where a single mother suddenly becomes a hero." I did not answer. I only met his gaze and spoke slowly. "I do not need to be a hero. I am a mother. And you crossed a line." He stood and walked toward me, each footstep echoing on the concrete like a ticking clock. But I did not step back. "If you think using a child to drag a man back into the dark is right, then you are not only cruel, you are weak." His face barely shifted, yet I saw a flicker of tension in his eyes. He paused, head tilted as if studying me. "You are not afraid," I answered. "I have feared many things. Fear of being alone, fear of losing everything. But when you tried to pull a child into your filth, you did not frighten me. You angered me." Silence stretched thin between us. Then Volkov stepped back, sat again, and this time lit his cigarette. Smoke drifted upward as he spoke, his tone flat and cold. "You have courage, Emily, but courage cannot protect the ones you love from consequence." I knew that, but I also knew he had lost his advantage. Without another word, I placed on the worn table a recording of his threat that morning and a photograph of the license plate from the car that tried to take Chloe. "I have already sent these to a lawyer and to a journalist. If anything happens to me, or to Nate, or to Chloe, all of this will go public." His brow tightened, the first true crack in his control. I did not wait for an answer. I turned and walked toward the exit, sweat cold across my back, hands trembling, but I did not stop. At the doorway I spoke once more, without looking back. "Do not try again. You do not know what a mother is." Then I stepped into the open air, carrying fear with me. Yes, but something stronger as well. Faith. Because for the first time, I had not run. I stood for my daughter. I faced the man who haunted Nate's past. And now, not only he, but I as well, had declared war. When I returned from the warehouse, Nate was already waiting in the lobby. He did not speak at first, only looked at me as though we had both woken from the same nightmare. I knew he had read my message, knew I had gone to confront Volkov on my own, and I knew he was angry. Yet the first thing he did was pull me into his arms and hold me tight. Later, when we sat on the sofa in the quiet of the living room, I told him everything, from the way his eyes shifted. I could see pride fighting with a fear that twisted deep inside him. He did not scold me, but I knew what he was thinking. Volkov would not stop because of a warning. He was a man who measured his steps, and if I had walked into his territory, he would not let that stand unanswered. Yet something changed after that meeting. Volkov no longer hid behind shadows. He sent Nate a formal invitation, a meeting, a proposal, and a hostage. The name David appeared in the short note with no signature and no address, and Nate understood at once. David was a man Nate once helped escape the old organization, a chef who had worked inside Volkov's restaurant network, a man with a wife and children living quietly in Texas, someone Nate saw as a younger brother. Volkov had taken him, using him like a pawn to threaten Nate back into the fold, or at the very least to prove that no one truly leaves that world unmarked. I knew Nate would never abandon David, and I knew he would not allow Chloe and me to be pulled further into danger. But this time, I refused to stand outside the line. I told him we needed to end this without blood. Nate looked at me for a long time. In his eyes I caught a glimpse of the man shaped by violence and betrayal, the boy who had learned survival before softness. Then something gentled in him. He said he had an offer, a compromise. The meeting took place on a bleak evening at an abandoned building outside the city. Nate went in with two men he trusted. I waited in a rented car outside, listening through an earpiece, watching through the small feed he had set up in advance. Volkov entered like a shadow accustomed to darkness. He sat opposite Nate, arms folded, a faint smile as though discussing weather rather than power. "Emily is brave," he said, his tone light as idle gossip. Nate did not answer. He placed a small USB drive on the table. Inside it were financial blueprints for a chain of legitimate restaurants, clean on paper, yet capable of becoming a quiet laundering stream if someone like Volkov chose to use it. Nate knew he would not refuse such a door, but the price was David, and a firm guarantee that no one in Volkov's circle would ever touch Emily or Chloe again. Volkov studied Nate like a chess master weighing his final move. He did not ask a question, nor threaten. He simply picked up the USB, turned it between his fingers, and nodded. "Very well, but do not believe you will get another chance." Nate answered with a voice cold as polished steel. "I do not need another chance. I only need your word." An hour later, David was left near an old gas station 20 miles from the city. He was bruised. It's shaken, but alive, without signs of brutal harm. When Nate brought him to the apartment, I greeted him with a gentle embrace while Chloe offered him a glass of orange juice like a tiny guardian welcoming someone home. For the moment, silence settled around us. A fragile peace, but peace nonetheless. Still, I knew nothing ends so neatly. Volkov had accepted the terms, but he had never been a man driven by money alone. He was the type who sought power, control, the thin reins hidden beneath every bargain, which meant we were still living inside a delicate moment, each choice echoing into consequences we could not yet see. But David was safe, and Nate, no matter the scars left on him, had chosen the path aligned with who he wanted to become. He did not return to the darkness. He did not betray the life he was building, and for me, that was enough to keep believing. We returned to the apartment after 3 long days without real sleep, without enough quiet conversations, without allowing ourselves even a single moment of true safety. David had been moved to a temporary safe house. Watched by a private doctor and a discreet security team, Nate arranged himself. Nate never said openly what price he paid for David's freedom, but I knew it was not simple. It was not only data or money, it was the cost of bending when every fiber in him hated compromise. The apartment was unchanged, clean and serene, and far too spacious for someone who once clung to every inch of ordinary life the way I did. But this time, stepping inside felt different. It did not feel like shelter, nor like a refuge. It felt like home. Chloe ran into the bedroom, tossed her backpack aside, and jumped onto the bed with her favorite bear, as though nothing in her world had ever trembled. Children have their own quiet way of finding normal again, even when the ground beneath them has shifted. I stood in the kitchen rinsing grapes, listening to the steady hush of water, and felt my heart break open in small, silent pieces. Nate came up behind me, resting a hand gently on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" I nodded, though there were no words to hold all that swirled inside me. Exhaustion, gratitude, relief, and a fear not yet faded. I turned to him, studying his face for a long moment before asking, "Why did you do all of this? Why risk so much?" "Bargain. Save him. Protect me and my child. You could have turned away and let everything disappear before it ever began." Nate was quiet for a moment, then lifted his hand to my cheek. "I have never met anyone who made me want to start over the way you do. You did not run from my past. You did not try to rescue me. You simply stood there and saw me as human. Not a criminal. Not a restaurateur. Not someone begging for forgiveness. You looked at me like someone worth loving." My throat tightened. I had once believed I knew love, or believed I came close, but no one had ever spoken to me like that. No one had ever made me feel like enough without having to earn the right to be chosen. I placed my hand over his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath the fabric. "I do not know where this will go, Nate. I do not know how long we can hold on to all of this. But since the day you appeared, I have not felt alone. I feel part of something larger than myself. And that is why I want to stay." Nate pressed a kiss to my forehead and drew me into his arms. In that embrace, I felt allowed to soften, to trust, to dream of something I once believed belonged only to other people. A family. That evening, after Chloe fell asleep, Nate and I sat on the balcony. The sky was clear, the city stretching beneath us like a quiet tapestry of shimmering light. We did not say much. Every so often we looked at each other, shared a small smile, held hands. It had been so long since I felt peace like that, not because danger had passed, but because I no longer faced it alone. Nate was not perfect. Neither was I. We were two people made of different fractures, scars hidden beneath the surface. Yet in that moment, I knew one thing with certainty. We were stitching each other together with honesty. It was not a fairy tale beginning. It was real. And I chose the real. Whatever may come. I chose to stay. 3 days later, I returned to the hospital in my familiar white uniform, my employee badge pinned to my chest, making me feel as though I were stepping back into a life I once knew. The halls were still bright. The smell of disinfectant hung thick in the air. Intercom calls and hurried footsteps of doctors and nurses echoed just as they always had. As if nothing in the world had shifted, but I had. I walked in like someone who had weathered a storm. No longer the cautious Emily who kept her head down, worked hard, and went home quietly at the end of the day. I had learned to stand, to protect, and to know I deserved to live rather than simply exist. Camila was the first to rush to me, wrapping me in a tight hug, worry and relief shining in her eyes. "You scared me, Emily. I thought you might never come back." I squeezed her hand, offered a small smile. "I thought so too. But this is still where I belong." "Is it not?" We shared a soft laugh, then returned to our routines as though nothing had come between them. I felt at ease among the patients, among tired breaths and grateful glances for a glass of water or a gentle question. Yet that fragile peace did not last. That afternoon, while I was changing a bandage for an older patient, a familiar name drifted from the front desk and froze me in place. Tyler. I never thought I would see him here again. In the place where he once picked me up with a polished smile and patient words, before his truth revealed itself, and he walked out of his daughter's life without a backward look. He appeared in the doorway with the same practiced confidence, hair neatly styled, shirt pressed, that half smile that once blinded me. But this time, I did not tremble. "Emily," he said, as if nothing between us had ever shattered. I gave a small nod, my voice steady. "What are you doing here?" Tyler feigned surprise, though calculation flickered behind his eyes. "I heard you were out for a few weeks. Thought I would check on you. And little Chloe. How is she?" My jaw tightened. "Do not say her name. You have no right." He shrugged lightly. Still direct. I see. But Emily, seems like you are doing well. I heard you have drivers now. Black cars and all. Living with someone from the big restaurant circles. I saw his name. Nate Romano. Right. Looks like you are moving up in the world. His voice fell into a cutting tone I remembered all too well. The one that always came after the charming words. Just as it had when he turned his back and left us like we were nothing more than an inconvenience. I did not flinch. I met his gaze and held it. If you are here to learn something about my life, do not bother. I am living the life you chose to abandon. With a man my daughter trusts. Something you never earned. And if you try to come near Chloe again, remember this time I will not be silent. Tyler's laugh was soft but thin. And for the first time that edge in his eyes faltered. He leaned closer. Voice low. You really think someone like Nate can protect you forever? Men like him always have enemies. And when that catches up, you will be back here. With the old Carter name and 2 empty hands just like before. Then he walked away, leaving behind an expensive cologne and a chill at the base of my neck. I exhaled slowly, steadying my breath, refusing to shake. Tyler had not appeared by accident. He knew something, or wanted something, and this time, I would not let him step through my life again. Not now that I had learned to stand, not when I had a reason to fight, and never. Not once. While I still had a daughter to protect at any cost. When I told Nate that Tyler had shown up at the hospital, he did not react right away. He simply sat there, one hand resting on the table, his finger tapping a slow rhythm, while his gaze stayed fixed on the window where the last light of day was fading. But I could feel the storm rising inside him. Nate was not the kind of man who erupted. He grew quiet when angry, and when he finally stood, took his coat, and left me with only one short sentence. I understood he had made his decision. He told me I did not need to be afraid, that this time Tyler would not have another chance to threaten anyone. I did not ask what Nate planned to do. A part of me did not want to know. And another part trusted completely that he would choose the right way. Not with fists, not with blind vengeance, but with a quiet kind of power he had earned in the years it took him to rebuild his life. 2 days later, I received a call from Nate's attorney. His tone was clear, professional, without excess words. He informed me that Tyler's records had been reviewed. Unexplained income, discrepancies in financial statements, even old debts long buried had been brought back into the light. He also told me that, at Nate's request, a petition had been prepared in advance to strip Tyler of any potential parental claim over Chloe, should he ever attempt to reappear in her life. The attorney said it was a lawful, meticulous move, leaving no loose ends. But I knew the law alone would not be enough to keep Tyler away. Nate knew it as well, and he had prepared the rest. That evening, after I put Chloe to bed, Nate came home. He sat beside me, removed his watch, and told the story slowly. He had met Tyler, not in a cafe or a lawyer's office, but in an empty parking lot near an old subway line. A place without cameras, without witnesses. Nate did not harm him, but he made Tyler understand one thing with absolute clarity. He told him that if he ever came near me or Chloe again, he would not be facing an angry father or a protective boyfriend. He would face the man Volkov himself had once watched carefully. The past Nate never glorified, but one he could call upon if he had to. Tyler laughed at first, as if he did not believe him. But Nate did not need to threaten. He simply placed an envelope on the hood of Tyler's car. Inside were copies of every legal document, every debt record, and still frames from the security footage at the hospital the day Tyler appeared. Nate said, "This is the last time I will rely on memory to keep you away. If I must, I will use power." And Tyler understood. When Nate finished, I sat silent for a long moment. I did not know what to feel. I was shaken, moved, and filled with something deeply real. Not everyone can protect the ones they love with quiet strength like that. I placed my hand on his and held it. I do not know what to say. Nate looked at me, his eyes softening. "You do not need to say anything. Just let me do what I am here to do. Protect the people I love." I leaned my head against his shoulder. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to brace myself against the world. In the gentle darkness of the apartment, I knew Tyler would not return. Not because he feared Nate, but because for the first time, he understood that some people cannot be intimidated, and that a man like Nate, once he chooses to protect someone, does it to the end, quietly, without blood, but enough to make sure no one ever makes the same mistake twice. That night, when I returned from my shift, the apartment was bathed in a different kind of light, not the familiar white glow from the ceiling, but the warm amber flicker of candles stretching across the wood floor, reflecting softly through the crystal glasses arranged neatly on a table already set for dinner. I stepped inside, startled for a moment by the stillness and the faint scent of lavender mingled with fresh-baked pastry. Chloe ran out from the living room in a white dress that swayed around her knees, holding a small rose in her hand. "Mommy has to close her eyes," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement as she tried to sound solemn. I did as she asked, letting her lead me a few steps before Nate's voice rose, low and warm. "You can open them." And when I did, Nate stood before me in a deep navy shirt, his eyes full of feeling, one hand gently holding Chloe's. Behind him, the room glowed with dozens of tiny candles, and along the wall hung ribbons holding photographs of the three of us. From those first fragile days at the hospital to our first morning in the apartment, to the afternoon in the park when Chloe insisted on taking a picture with Nate as if he were her superhero. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. He said he once believed he did not deserve a normal life, that his world had been too dark to hold anyone in the light. But then I came, carrying quiet strength, courage, and a heart unafraid of the shadows even he had once tried to flee. "You did not just accept me, Emily," he said. "You taught me how to begin again." Then he knelt, and in that moment, Chloe stepped forward, offering him a small velvet box with a solemn face and bright shining eyes. "Daddy, Nate said this was the most important thing," she whispered. "I kept it safe all week in my pencil box and I did not open it once." I looked at her, then at Nate, my heart racing so hard I could hardly breathe. He opened the box. Inside was a simple platinum ring with a small stone that glimmered softly, not extravagant, but beautiful enough to steal my breath. "Emily Carter, will you marry me? Will you be Chloe's mother the way you already are? Will you be the person I love, protect, and build a life with, from now until forever?" I do not remember how many times I nodded, only that my voice trembled when I whispered yes. Nate rose, slipped the ring onto my finger, and wrapped me in his arms as though the world beyond those walls no longer mattered. Chloe clapped and cheered, then wrapped her arms around our legs, completing us in a perfect three-person embrace. That evening we ate dinner together. No fancy restaurant, no elegant wine, just Nate's homemade pasta and a dessert Chloe chose from a recipe on YouTube. I sat watching the two of them, one big and one small, talking about plans for our first family vacation, and emotion swelled inside me. Once, I had wondered whether I could ever love again after everything I had endured. But now, with the ring on my hand, Nate's fingers intertwined with mine, and Chloe's laughter ringing bright and pure, I knew one truth beyond doubt. None of us were perfect, but we were pieces that fit. And love, in the end, is not about finding someone without a past. It is about finding the one who makes you want to walk forward together, no matter how dark that past once was. 3 days after the night he proposed, I sat alone in the familiar cafe near the hospital, stirring a latte I was not really drinking. Outside, the sky hung heavy and gray. Seattle in late autumn, damp and cold, slowing everything to a quiet crawl. I was engaged. The words echoed in my mind, yet they did not steady me. Instead, something soft and uneasy slipped between the joy, unsettling my heart, not because I did not love Nate, not because I doubted his loyalty or his love, but because of the future. The future is always frightening when you have once lost everything. Camila arrived 10 minutes late with a warm smile and 2 cinnamon pastries still steaming. She sat down, studied my face for a moment, then asked without hesitation, "You look like someone who just got engaged and is now planning an escape." I let out a faint laugh and leaned back in my chair. "I do not know," Is it wrong that I am still scared? Even when everything is good. Camila took a bite of pastry and nodded thoughtfully. Not wrong at all. Honestly, if you were not scared, I would worry. I have watched you walk through so much. This love did not come to you easily. You have every right to wonder, but do not let that doubt drag you back into loneliness. I sat quietly, then spoke the truth. I love Nate. Camila, I truly do. But he has a past. One I sometimes fear may not stay buried forever. And me, I am just a nurse. A single mother who was betrayed. Who once believed she would never be enough for anyone. I am not afraid to love. I am afraid that one day love may not be enough to hold everything together. Camila placed her hand on mine, squeezing gently. Emily, you do not need to be perfect. You just need to be real. And I have never seen anyone live as honestly as you do. Nate chose you not because you resemble someone else. He chose you because you are exactly what he needs. I have seen the way he looks at you. As if losing you would take the meaning out of his world. My eyes pricked with tears. Do you believe two people with so many wounds can build something that lasts? Camila smiled. Her expression soft and steady. Love is not for the perfect. Emily, it is for those brave enough to keep walking even when their hearts still carry scars. You two have come too far to turn back now. And if you are still afraid, tell him. Let the person you chose to walk beside you know what you need. What you fear. Do not stay silent. Do not hide it. Do not pretend you have to be strong alone. I nodded and lifted my cup. Though the coffee had gone cold, her words stayed with me the rest of that afternoon. Love is not for the perfect. It is for those who keep going. And perhaps I had already walked too far to stop because of a shadow of fear. Nate had always been there. Steady. Sincere. Never once letting me stand alone. I needed to learn that not every good thing is temporary. Some things are real. And perhaps, just perhaps, this love was one of them. That morning, the sky was a rare, clear blue in the middle of Seattle's autumn. I was preparing breakfast when Chloe ran out of her room, hair tangled, clutching her worn stuffed bear. She chattered breathlessly about dreaming. Nate had turned into a superhero who flew over buildings to save me from a three-headed monster. I smiled and nodded as she spoke in excited bursts. Nate walked out of the bedroom looking half awake. His t-shirt rumpled and his eyes barely open. He rubbed Chloe's head and asked whether she wanted eggs or toast like every morning. Chloe looked up and answered without thinking. Daddy makes eggs better than Mommy. The kitchen fell silent for a heartbeat. I turned toward her. And Nate froze. Her words had not been planned. Not considered. They simply slipped out like breath. Natural and unforced. Chloe did not even realize what she had said. She climbed into her chair, swinging her legs, and added, Daddy, can I have extra cheese? My heart tightened. I did not know whether to cry or to panic. I had thought of this moment before. Wondered whether there would come a day when Chloe would see Nate as family without being told. But when it arrived, I was not ready. Nate stood still, and I saw something soften in his eyes. A quiet emotion settling in the calm. He tied on his apron without a word and began cooking. The room returned to its ordinary rhythm, though none of us were quite the same as we had been a minute earlier. After breakfast, Nate cleaned up while I took Chloe to her room to get dressed. As I brushed her hair, I asked gently, What did you call Nate just now? Chloe tilted her head and answered casually. I called him Daddy. She paused, then looked up as if suddenly remembering. Mommy, do you not like it? I swallowed and shook my head. No, I am not angry. I just want you to understand. Nate is someone Mommy loves. Someone who is wonderful to you and to me. But your real father is Tyler. Even though... I stopped, unwilling to speak badly of Tyler in front of her. Even though the anger inside me had never fully cooled. Chloe looked at me for a long moment and whispered, But Daddy Nate is here with me. I like being with him better. I feel safe. Her simple answer melted something deep inside me. I held her close and kissed the top of her head, saying nothing. Sometimes children understand the truth more clearly than grown-ups. That night, after Chloe fell asleep, Nate and I sat on the balcony with 2 cups of hot tea. I told him every word Chloe had said. Slowly, carefully. He did not speak at first. He stared into the distance as though gathering the whole night sky into his thoughts. Then he turned to me and said quietly, "When I was a kid, I never called anyone Dad with trust in my voice. I always believed I did not deserve to be called that. But today, when Chloe said it without thinking, I realized some things do not need planning. They happen because they are right." Tears filled my eyes before I noticed. Not from sadness, but from a gratitude I could not name. Nate placed his hand over mine and spoke softly. "If one day she calls me that again, I want to be sure you do not feel afraid. I will never try to replace anyone. I only want to be here, to be someone she can trust, the way I have always stood beside you." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. There were no doubts left. No hesitation. In that moment, I understood that this love was not only mine, it was hers too, and the three of us, each once alone in our own way, had finally found one another. Not perfectly, but truthfully. That Friday afternoon began as ordinary as any other. I had just finished my shift at the hospital. A light mist falling outside, and Chloe had been picked up from preschool by Nate. He sent a message saying the two of them were at the bakery near home choosing a cake for the weekend. I smiled, feeling light and safe. But that calm lasted only a few minutes. The moment I stepped into the building lobby, my phone rang. It was Nate's voice, but not the voice I knew. It was low, urgent, sharp like steel. "Go straight to the apartment. Lock the windows. Close the curtains. Do not open the door for anyone. I am on my way." Before I could ask anything, the line went dead. My heart hammered. My legs moved faster toward the elevator, and unease pressed into every inch of me. Once inside the apartment, I did exactly as he said. Chloe was not there. I called Nate, but he did not answer. My mind filled with noise, fear rushing through every dark possibility. I tried to breathe slowly, but calm would not come. 10 minutes later, the door burst open. Nate stepped in, rain on his sleeves, shirt slightly wrinkled, eyes burning. He pulled me close quickly and asked if I was all right. I nodded, breath caught in my chest. "Where is Chloe?" "She is with Camila. I sent her there the moment I sensed something was wrong. Someone followed me and Chloe from school. A strange car. False plates. And not just watching. Nate told me that while he and Chloe were at the bakery, a man approached, pretending to ask for directions but never taking his eyes off her. Nate noticed. Instinct rose in him like a strike of lightning. When the man moved one step closer, Nate intervened. Not loudly, not violently, but with speed and certainty. He blocked the path, raised his voice enough to draw attention, and the man backed away. But Nate knew it was no coincidence. He contacted an old friend, someone who once worked in witness protection, and now we knew. Some men tied to Volkov's old network were not finished, perhaps not by Volkov's hand, but by those who owed favors or carried grudges. I sat still, holding myself steady as Nate continued. He told me he had followed the car as it left the bakery and tracked it to an old lot outside the city. And there, he handled it. Not with the law, not with a warning, but with the darker part of himself. The part I always sensed existed but had never seen this clearly. He did not tell me everything he did, only that the man would not return. His eyes did not waver. No regret. No tremor. Only cold certainty. I sat beside him, my hand gripping his. Part of me felt fear. Not fear of Nate, but fear of what love could demand of a person who refused to lose the people he cherished. Yet another part understood. If I had been there, I might have done something reckless too. Nate looked at me, voice rough. "I never wanted you to see this side of me. I tried to bury it. But if anyone touches you or Chloe again, I will not sit still, even if I have to walk back into the dark." I held his hand tighter and nodded. "I do not ever want you to have to do that. But I understand. And I am here. Not to hold you in the light, but to go beside you wherever life leads. Because we are a family. And family is where people do whatever it takes. Even the things no one else would dare to do." I woke in the middle of the night to the soft patter of rain against the window. The room was dim, lit only by the warm glow of a night lamp in the corner. Nate slept beside me, one arm resting lightly around my waist, in an instinctive gesture of protection even in his dreams. I turned toward him and watched him for a long while. His face in sleep was gentler, yet the faint trace of vigilance remained, etched by years lived in a world I would never fully understand. I knew he loved me, loved Chloe, loved the life we were building piece by piece, and I knew, just as I could not erase my own past, he could not erase the things he once did simply to survive and protect those who mattered. Something in me shifted after what happened at the bakery. It was not fear, it was acceptance. No one walks out of darkness without scars, and no one loves without taking a risk. The next morning I took a half-day off, left Chloe with Camila, and drove alone to a place I never thought I would return to, a small cemetery north of the city, where my mother rested. She was a strong woman, who raised me alone, who never asked for help, who never loved a second time. Perhaps that was why I once believed I would live the same way, that my daughter would be enough, and love was a luxury I could not afford again. I stood there among bare trees and dry winter wind, looking at her simple stone carved with her name. Mom, I am getting married. It sounds wild. I know. I once thought I would never be brave enough to love again, especially not someone like him. But Mama, Nate loves me not with pretty words but with actions. He protects me with both the bright and the dark parts of himself. He chose me even when I could not choose myself. And Chloe, she calls him Daddy without hesitation. I used to think love would weaken me, would make me dependent, would steal the freedom I fought so hard for with so many tears. But that is not true. This love does not chain or swallow or demand. It makes me stronger, clearer, more worthy. I do not know what the future holds, but I know that if I do not walk forward with him, I will regret it. I choose him. I choose our little family. I choose the imperfect pieces too, because I have lived too long in the shadow of fear. Now it is time to step out. I left the cemetery as dusk settled in. When I returned home, Chloe was napping and Nate was in the kitchen pouring coffee. He looked at me with a hint of worry, sensing something shifting inside me. I walked to him, wrapped my arms around him from behind, rested my chin on his shoulder, and whispered, I choose you, not because I have to, because I want to. I know there will be challenges, darkness, and days when we do not fully understand each other, but I am not afraid anymore. Nate turned, his eyes catching the light with sudden warmth. He did not ask if I was sure. He simply nodded and pulled me into his embrace as if he never meant to let go. In that embrace, I felt my whole world. A man who once lived in shadow, a little girl who had longed for a family, and a woman who once believed she could never love again. We were no longer three lonely souls. We were a home, and for the first time in years, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. No more hesitation, no more half-steps. I chose love, and love, at last, chose me. I am your DIT assistant, here to translate your Vietnamese narrative into English exactly as requested in a slow storytelling tone. Emotionally rich, psychologically deep, visually evocative, written in one seamless paragraph, with no bullet points, no symbols, no dashes, and numbers written in words. Below is your translation. That evening, our small apartment glowed with the warm light from the kitchen lamps, the aroma of the lasagna Nate had made filling the air, while Chloe ran around the dining table with a napkin tied like a superhero cape. On the table, 3 place settings waited neatly. A scented candle flickered. A glass of juice rested for Chloe, and gentle ruby wine shimmered softly in the glasses set for Nate and me. Everything felt simple, yet deeply peaceful. Not the quiet peace of a movie scene, but the kind born from acceptance and gratitude after weathering storms. We sat together, and Chloe lifted her glass of orange juice first, speaking with the solemnity only a child can muster when she whispered that she was grateful to have a mommy and a daddy. I looked at her, then at Nate. My heart caught still in my chest. We tapped our glasses gently, needing no grand declarations. After everything we had survived, I understood how precious this moment was. A home does not need perfection, only love, sincerity, and the courage to stay. Dinner ended with chocolate cake Chloe had decorated with tiny bright candies. Nate pretended to protest that it was too sweet, and Chloe puffed her cheeks with indignation, insisting that I had told her she was the best chef in the house. Laughter echoed, clear and bright, as though it washed away every shadow belonging to the past. In that moment, I did not think about old wounds or fears or the roads we had stumbled through. I simply lived, fully and gratefully, with the two people I loved most. If this story has a message to offer those who have followed it to the end, it is this: life rarely unfolds the way we expect. Yet sometimes it is the unexpected turn that leads us to the place where our hearts truly belong. Each of us may have been a single mother finding her footing again, a man marked by the scars of a past he never asked for, or a child longing for a home made of love. But when we find the courage to love once more, to forgive, to open our hearts instead of closing them, every door has the chance to open. Thank you for staying with us through the final chapter of this journey. How did Emily, Chloe, and Nate's story resonate with you? Did it remind you of something tender or fierce or once fragile in your own life? If it did, please share your thoughts below. We always want to hear the voice that rises from the deepest part of your heart. And if you feel this story carries meaning, please support the Dear Single Mom channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with those who might need a little warmth in their days. Every view, every kind word, fuels us to continue bringing stories filled with tenderness, sincerity, and quiet humanity. Until the next video, where new journeys begin and new lessons unfold, we wish you health, peace, and a heart warm enough to love and to be loved. Farewell for now, and see you again soon.